Do you want to stand back?
Okay. Morning, colleagues. It's 9:30 and we are due to start at 9:30. Can I start by advising everyone that this meeting is being webcast for live or subsequent broadcast. In fact, the webcast is now on. Members of the press and public may record and take photographs, except where there are confidential or exempt items. And I underline that because I do expect there will be members of the public here this morning. So with that, can I also say that we're starting at 9:30. I aim to be onto the issue of Homes for Ukraine at 10 o'clock. So I put the cabinet member on notice that is my intention, and therefore his earlier report will have to be squeezed into the period before 11 o'clock. And that will give us, I hope, a good hour and 10 minutes for the Homes for Ukraine item. Also to say that we have a video that's been put together with interviews with hosts, and that will be presented to the committee as part of the evidence giving this morning. And John is aware of that, and it means that we can focus in on hearing from hosts, and that would be a good introduction, if you like, I think, to a discussion here this morning. So with all of that, can I ask whether there are any apologies? I know that Deirdre has to leave us early, so I'm sorry about that, Deirdre, but she's got a meeting with the leader in HMS Dairying Room, so she hasn't got many steps to take to get to it. But we have apologies for an early departure by Deirdre. I think, have we any others? No. Okay, declarations of interest, are there any? None. Action notes. The action notes, we have, or rather, Fiona has indicated to the cabinet member that there are a number of outstanding issues, and we hope that John will pick those up in the course of his comments that will come in just a moment. So action 2, action 3, and action 7 are issues that we would want the cabinet member to reflect on. Other than that, anything else to be said? No. So, John, we move on to the cabinet member portfolio priorities. And I did say 9:35 to 10 o'clock. I've given you an extra couple of minutes, John.
I'll try and use them as wisely as I can, then, Chair. And I'm mindful of your injunction around the timing, so I'll be brief in opening remarks, and then happy to take any questions. Obviously, this is now quite an extensive portfolio. Kerry and I were just joking about the length of the title on the nameplate. Of course, that doesn't capture a couple of other things that I picked up, including HR and work around bereavement services. It also means I'm reporting into several scrutiny committees as well. So in addition to coordinating, I've reported in so far to resources and to housing and neighbourhoods as well. So the focus of this report is specifically on the issues around tackling inequalities, around social justice and inclusion. And I'm also not going to touch today on domestic abuse because I'm mindful that I'm coming back to this committee in February to pick up on those issues. So I think the biggest challenge that we face, bluntly, as a city around inequality is the cost of living crisis. And what we've tried to set out in this report is the detail of some of our response to that crisis. We declared a cost of living emergency back in September. That was then backed by standing up a strategic response group, which Richard Brooks, who's also joining us online today, chairs, and supported with 5 million that was taken from the Financial Resilience Reserve. It's very clear that what we're doing in terms of our cost of living response is about city leadership and partnership, especially with our voluntary and community sector partners, and of course our friends in the faith sector as well. I think the delivery against our cost of living programme has been rapid, and it's been pretty impressive. And I would like to say a word of thanks to our officers, our partners and citizens for making that happen. Just some headlines. We've got 142 warm welcome spaces up and running in this city since September. There's more to come. There's actually 202 places of registered an interest. That means we've got cross-city coverage now with the warm spaces. We've backed that up with the warm welcome grants. There's been 113 applications received for the large grants of up to £10,000 and 39 applications for the micro grants of up to 500. We're also planning the co-location of services, creating some hubs of support. There's been a new package of support that's gone in for food banks and projects. We knew that there was real pressures around the supply of food to our food banks. You'll have seen the scheme that we launched for that. There's been 100 applications made under that food bank support grant scheme. There are now monthly payments being made to ensure that food banks can access a supply of food over the winter. We've also done other things like supporting youth centres to buy cooking equipment and so forth. Thirdly, we've focused on boosting advice and support around income maximisation. We all know from our own advice work that there are lots of people who don't claim everything that they're entitled to. So that's why we increased opening hours and capacity at our neighbourhood advice and information centres. That's phone and face-to-face capacity. We've boosted grant support for our community organisations we work with around advice. That's already put an extra £509,000 into people's pockets since November. I think, again, that's something that's incredibly welcome and needed. We've also, of course, delivered energy measures. There were additional energy vouchers that have been delivered via our local welfare provision team, and they've reached around 5,000 households. So it's really been about collaboration and co-design driving that programme. The next stage of this work is to take a sort of longer term look. We've had the immediate crisis response, but clearly there's work that we need to do around prevention, getting in early and supporting people before they fall into a very serious crisis. And there's also work we want to do around engaging with our business community in the city as well to support this. Secondly, this is all driven very much by data, all of this work. 3.3 in the report sets out the City Observatory, which of course we launched at the latter part of last year. I think a really powerful tool, brings together a lot of information that we've had sat around this organisation and amongst partners, also using national as well as local data sets. That enables us, I think, to do two things. Firstly, to be transparent around the challenges and the opportunities that exist in our city, and to invite some comment and support from others, which enables us then, secondly, to build and strengthen partnerships and better calibrate and target the resources that we need to put in place to deal with some of those issues. And if you look on page 7, there's a particularly interesting map around financial resilience within the city, which overlays the various data sets and gets a real understanding of where the most vulnerable are to financial insecurity. That then enables us to follow through with some policy and service approach. The data also shows us just how diverse Birmingham now is. You'll have seen the census data that's been published. We are now an incredibly super diverse city, an incredible strength and asset, as well as raising some challenges for public service delivery. Having that data enables us to better engage and respond to the challenges and opportunities that brings. And 3.4 of the report sets out some of the steps that we've been taking in that regard. We continue to drive forward Everyone's Battle, Everyone's Business, our overall equalities strategy and action plan. I've already reported on some of the workforce issues around that to resources, so I don't want to repeat that here, but just to say I think some of the changes that we're making to human resources within this council are starting to bear fruit in terms of the diversity of representation across staff, and therefore leading through to challenging those and changing those race and gender pay gaps. We'll also be very transparent around publishing data dashboards to be clear about what's happening within the organisation. And I've also, as I reported to resources, commissioned an independent review of HR to ensure that we are meeting all of those issues and challenges around equality and getting some independent oversight and commentary of that. Finally, we've established and strengthened a series of partnerships to engage with our diverse communities and foster further community engagement. It's referenced in the report to the work that we're doing with our Gypsy, Roman and Traveller communities, the Proud Rainbow City Partnership that we've set up to work with our LGBTQ plus communities, and of course the community stakeholder panel. Continuing also to drive forward some really important agendas, especially the work around the real living wage. As you'll see, we've increased the number of employees receiving the real living wage in this city and the number of accredited real living wage employers. That's been done again in partnership with businesses, and I think it's also really impressive that we've managed to continue that take-up of the real living wage, given the impact of COVID and the economic situation that we face. We've also renewed our faith covenant. Birmingham was the first city to sign a faith covenant about how we will work with our many faith communities. We've renewed that over the course of this year, and we'll continue to work with our faith communities on many social justice and other issues. So that's just to give you a flavour of the progress and direction within the report. I'm conscious of your injunction around time, Chair, so happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, John. Richard Brooke, our Director of Strategy, Policy and Partnerships, is online. Richard, is there anything you want to add at this stage? You're on mute, Richard.
Apologies. No, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions and respond.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, members, I'll go down the line from this. I'll start at this end and work my way down. Idris.
Thanks, and thanks, around the cost of living costs. I mean, it's good to support the organizations and the communities and also the workplaces. I find it a lot of from my advice bureau with the bills of 500, 600 pounds a month. So what sort of support we can lend them, or where can we advise them to go? And also with the cost of living crisis, apart from those mentioned here, on an individual basis, a lot of people residents are struggling with meeting the bills and also, feeding their children. And what sort of individual support can be lent to these residents?
Take them one by one, Chair. Yeah, absolutely, Idris. And again, I'm seeing the same stories in my own advice bureau out on the glebe. So that's why we put in place a number of those measures as set out in the report. I think really key to meeting some of those challenges around the affordability of bills is maximising people's income. Hence the reason why we extended the opening hours at the 2 neighbourhood advice and information centres and put extra capacity into telephone contact as well. And that has borne fruit. People are accessing more benefit that they're entitled to and putting that money into their pockets. We haven't got a whole set of magic wands that we can wave around some of this stuff as a city council. That's true. We need also national policy responses to this as well. I don't want to get dragged into partisan dispute here, but I think there are ongoing discussions around that. We will continue to look at what further needs are emerging and how we can tailor our responses to meet that. Again, some of that. The issues that we're picking up through the City Observatory and really getting into the detail of the data around how these issues are interacting and affecting communities. We'll then use that to design further approaches. And I say also this is about what we can do with partners. So it isn't just about the resource that we're putting in, it's what other partners can provide in the city. And I say we're also having some conversations with the business community going forward as well. I don't know whether, Richard, you want to add anything from an operational perspective about some of the work that we're doing there?
Thank you, Councillor Cotton. I suppose we were seized right at the beginning of this programme with the huge scale of need in the city relative to our available resources. So something like 300,000 people already living in poverty, compared to a 5 million initial allocation of resources, meant that we had to be really thoughtful about how we made best use of that fund. Thus, the focus on facilitating existing networks of support around the city and the very strong focus on enabling partners. And so right from the beginning of this programme, we've tried to reach out to a very large network of warm welcome organisations that were then able to provide warm welcome spaces, existing food projects in the city, and take advantage of of the strengths that were already present. What we will always struggle to do, I think, is to direct cash support at a sufficient number of people to address this problem. I think that our most effective use of cash is, on the one hand, to address those in the most urgent crisis, which means that we have to know who those people are, and secondly, to help them to access more valuable benefits, and that's been the strategy so far. Going forward in the programme, because I think there will continue to be a need for this programme for some time, our focus is going to be on trying to draw in additional resources, including from voluntary and community sector partners, from private sector partners across the city, and from volunteers. So we're trying to scale up the resources at the same time as focusing it on those who need it most. But I absolutely accept that it is a huge scale of need in the city relative to our cash resources.
Richard, reminder to colleagues, I think pretty well every member of the committee wants to speak. That means both questions and answers will have to be kept fairly short. Sean.
Thank you. My question to the cabinet member. The ND vouchers, you distribute property for reforms, but there also is a trend that the ND companies are forcing unpaid dark debits, forcing people in papers, meet on them. So do we know if that's a burden and what are we doing about it? Because the previous meters are expensive, so they are adding burden on the already struggling people. So other governments have announced that they are asking any company to stop that practice. What can we do to make sure that we don't have to burden them? That's one step. Second is, in your portfolio, for the past many years, we had a problem of illegal traveller camps. They were we are custody of the council, and we promised 2 traveller camps in Birmingham. So can you give the progress on the 2 traveller campsites? Thank you.
Okay, very quickly, in response to that, yeah, we know that the issue with prepayment meters is happening. We're trying to capture the extent of how that, how many people are affected by that, and we will continue to lobby for change around that issue. It is a really serious problem for people. Certainly share your views on that. On the issue of traveller encampments, I believe a report went to Housing and Neighbourhood Scrutiny on this. I'm looking at the chair to see if that's correct, or there is an update pending around that. I know that there's work ongoing around the action plan for addressing the provision of additional sites. I haven't got the full detail to hand with me today, but very happy to pick that up with you offline from this meeting, Shaman, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair.
I won't add anything to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. There are a couple of linked questions really, and they're regarding the advice and support sessions. So I noted they've actually got additional hours for open hours. I'm just wondering what the take-ups for how busy they've been during those particular sessions. We could find out some information in terms of how many people actually contacting them. And then it says down here that they're open for additional 2 hours in the requirements. I was under the impression that the one in the was open on Saturday mornings as well, but it doesn't confirm that here. Could you confirm that for me, that it's actually open on Saturday?
Richard has already confirmed on screen, Mick.
Yes, they are open on the facilities as well. I haven't got detailed figures on take up around additional hours, but we know that the more people are coming through, and we also know it's put more money into people's pockets, that extra 500,000. I'm sure we could probably produce the detailed figures around that, but it's clearly working and it's engaging more people.
Jack?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cotton, as we mark Holocaust Memorial Day, I wanted to ask about anti-Semitism within the city of Birmingham. Around Birmingham, you'll soon see some billboards coming up that show that Jewish people are 500% more likely to be a victim of hate crime. And we're also the 3rd highest city for anti-Semitism on campuses around Birmingham. We're also in the top 5 cities for anti-Semitism incidents as well. What is the council doing around dealing with anti-Semitism around the city, educating people and working with external stakeholders? And would the Cabinet member commit to meeting with the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council to formulate a programme of work to educate the citizens of Birmingham?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jack. This is a very important day, I think, for us to remember where hatred and prejudice and intolerance leads. I'm very proud of the fact that this city continues to support events around Holocaust Memorial Day. There's a civic act of commemoration this Sunday taking place at Millennium Point. Also earlier this week, I had the privilege of taking part in a tree planting ceremony that this city sponsored, along with remembering Srebrenica, remembering the genocide that happened in Srebrenica some 30 years ago. So, our commitment to challenging these issues, to challenging anti-Semitism and all forms of discrimination is absolutely solid. And of course, we also signed up to the International Holocaust Memorial Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism as a council some years ago. I have also previously met with the Jewish community leaders about this, and I'm very happy to meet with the Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies again to explore what else we can do as part of our ongoing work through our hate crime strategy to address these issues. There can be no place for this in Birmingham, and we've all got a duty to call it out.
Kerry?
Thanks, Chair. Richard answered part of my question, but the other bit of the question was around the sustainability, John, of the measures that have been put into place in terms of the extended advice hours and those things, but also the sustainability and how the council think, if there are any plans that the council have got in terms of ensuring that partnership working with organisations across the city that are, doing warm spaces and other services. In the past, we know that some organisations feel as though that partnership working hasn't always been given due respect and has been taken a bit for granted. So it's about how do we sustain that goodwill? How do we ensure that organisations providing those services working with us get the thanks that they deserve and the sort of recognition, if you like, that it's not just the council are doing this, and I know that a lot has been done, John, but it's really important that we need to sustain that and make sure that that goodwill carries on, because we know, and Richard alluded to, that this isn't something that is going to be able to be packed up in a box and put away anytime soon. It's going to be a long-term need for citizens in our city. Thanks, John.
Thanks. I think you're absolutely right. And partnership always has to be about an ongoing conversation and dialogue and engagement. It can't just be for a limited period while we deal with an issue and then we move on to something else. I do think we're in a much stronger place in this city than we have been for some time around the strength of that partnership. I think, we mobilised first during COVID, and now, it's been strengthened and deepened by what we're doing around the cost of living crisis, and we'll continue to do that. We're very closely investing in ensuring those conversations are happening regularly, that we're identifying where there are issues and gaps, and that we're working in lockstep with the sector. And the fact that we've now got a directorate that has partnerships in the title. We've got Richard and his team who are able to put some, actual officer capacity into ensuring that dialogue happens on a regular basis. And also we've got the City Partnership Board as well, which plays a really important role in bringing some of the big players together. So it's something we will continue to work very strongly on. And I absolutely agree with what you say around doing that. The sustainability issue is a challenge for us, as it is for every other local authority grappling with this. We've put the initial 5 million in. We are still looking at other opportunities for what other resources are needed. It's also important that we're responding to what can be a changing picture. So when we declared the original emergency back in September, it was very clear some immediate needs. So the warm welcome spaces, the supply of food to food banks and so forth. But we know that new needs emerge as this crisis deepens, and we need to be flexible in how we respond to that. I think the other thing is, as I said in the opening remarks, was it's not just about the immediate crisis response. It's about how we try and redesign and flex some of our systems so we're picking up people before they fall into crisis, before they're crossing the threshold of an advice centre. So we need to also be looking at how we do that more creatively as well.
Very quick comment from you, Richard. I'm conscious of the time.
Thank you, Chair. In that case, very briefly, I think the value for money of what we're doing at the moment makes an extremely strong argument for continuing to invest. And I will be bringing a paper to Cabinet in the coming months to look back on the first 6 months of this programme with some proposals for longer term support. So I think there's a very strong argument to be made for continuing to invest in some of these networks that we're facilitating across the city.
Deirdre?
Yes, thank you. You acknowledged near the beginning that there were benefits and people didn't realise and they weren't claiming what they were entitled to, which I'm sure is a problem. So we've extended our opening hours to help people with that. That's fine if people go and ask. But what else are you doing about advertising more widely to people what is available, so that if they don't go and ask, they still might hear about it?
So we're trying to use all of our communications channels to get those messages across, to get people to come and seek help. So there's information, literature. We're using social media channels. We're also using our community networks as well to just get those messages out. It is, I think, part of the reason why there is so much unclaimed benefit is a reluctance for people to come forward. You know, people are proud and don't necessarily want to seek help, and it's just about challenging some of that, saying, look, this is money you're entitled to, please come forward and claim. And the sums that we've already unlocked prove that there's a lot of unmet need, but we'll continue to use all of the channels that we have. And obviously I'll make sure that elected members continue to get some updates about the routes of referral, whether it's through our own service or through some of our third sector partners. I'll make sure that goes out as well.
Yeah, actually, very quick one. Jack made a really good point. In 2019, the council adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, and one of the decisions that we took at full council was that we were going to write to all the region's MPs, confirming that adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism and sort of give our support for that definition. But then the pandemic came along, and I'm not really quite sure if that was ever done. I don't expect you to be able to give me an answer on the top of your head on that. But, you know, it's probably not a bad thing anyway for us to make that, to reaffirm that, to support the definition of our definition of anti-Semitism, and circulate that to the MPs to remind them, because, as you say, it's a battle that never goes away. And I think the more solidarity that is shown, the better, because the Jewish population in the city is reducing. And I think that we're a city of sanctuary for everyone, not just for individual communities. No, thank you very much.
I'll happily pick up to see if it happened in the first place, and I'm very happy to restate the message.
Thank you. Just a quick question, if I may, Cabinet Member, just equal pay, equal consultants.
What's the question?
HR equal pay, use of consultants.
Yeah, but I'm not clear what the question is. Sorry.
Can you just say a few words on where we are in terms of your portfolio with HR?
So that I've already fed back into resources scrutiny. So there was an update provided to the chair at the meeting back in November. Very happy to share what I shared at resources with you outside of this meeting, Alex. Roger.
Yeah, so first of all, I think it is very important with the cost of living. The long-term solution to what's happened in the last 6 months is actually not so much about maximising people's income. It's about reducing dependency on keeping their homes warm via burning fossil fuels. One of the pernicious aspects of the current cost of living crisis is that it affects different people differently. So there isn't, for example, there's a bit of a misunderstanding that there's a cap on energy bills. There isn't. There's a cap on energy prices. And if you're in a very, very poorly insulated home, your energy bill can be well above the sort of figures in the media, or your home will be a lot cooler because you can't afford it more light. So the long-term solution to this is about insulating homes. There is now some significant progress being made on that, but we have a missed decade, the last 10 years, when we should have been doing this. We failed to do this, and now we're paying an extortionate price in this country for having failed to do that. And I think it's important to note that, important to keep an eye on that. More specifically, in terms of the report, just a couple of points. On the benefits side, do we have an estimate of how much unclaimed benefit there actually is? Appreciate we can't be precise on that, but there must be some sort of estimates. My sense is that, extremely welcome though it is, the amount we've actually identified so far is a very modest element of that. And if there is some data, I'd welcome that, because I think that is something we need to even should, hopefully, the cost of living crisis, the pressures of energy prices, if they do fall back, we need to ensure that pressure to maximise those benefit claiming continues, and it shouldn't just be something that's in response to the cost of living crisis. And then on the provision of the holiday activities, And this is a point I've made directly to Richard. The feedback I'm getting from my community is that actually financially, the support that's been given is meeting the need. So that's an extremely positive thing to say. But because of the scale of the problem, the actual capacity within the community to generate the volume of places that are now being needed, that capacity needs to be built. I think it can be, but the help is actually perhaps as much now in building that capacity as it is in providing the finances to fund it. And I'd welcome some feedback on how we can support our community groups to deliver that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. The estimate of number of unclaimed benefits and the financial value of those was actually action 2 so we'd already asked for that information. I'm going to bring Richard in first because there's obviously some data there, and then give you the last word, John. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. On the value of unclaimed benefits, it's extremely difficult to model this at Birmingham level, but some very rough rule of thumb, I think, gives us a sense of scale. So classically, levels of unclaimed benefits have been around 10% for income support, and if you have 300,000 people living in poverty and you assume that 10% of that is 10% of that is 30,000. If you just as a very crude rule of thumb said that they would be entitled to £1,000 per annum of unclaimed benefits, you're already into tens of millions of pounds across the city. So the scale of this of underclaiming is doubtless very large across Birmingham. The volume of benefits that we can specifically attribute to our extended contact centre opening hours is likely an underestimate of the total increase in benefits that have been generated through our cost of living programme, because it doesn't capture all of the people who are self-referring, using our online resources, not talking to our customer advisors. I agree it's a very important thing to continue focusing on. I'm very happy to come back and discuss this cost of living programme more generally with this committee, if that is what the chair would like, or to meet individually with councillors on these points.
Yeah, so really pleased to hear that financially that the holiday activity stuff is meeting that need. I think that's a really interesting point around how we further build community capacity. I know that I think we're in a stronger place for all the reasons I've just talked about earlier with those partnerships we've got with various community organisations, but really happy to come and have a more detailed conversation with you about that, Roger, and what else we might need to do to ensure that we've got the capacity in the right place.
Very much, John, and can I thank members for adhering to my time constraints. That's been very good. So I want to move on now. Thank you very much, John. To item 7, which is the Homes for Ukraine issue. Now, we have some members of the public, and I'm going to invite those members of the public, if they wish to move from the seats they're in to the seats over here, simply because we have a video to show, and you will have your backs to the screen if you don't move across here. So as a request, if you like, to your benefit, if you could move seat. Thank you very much. We have brought this item forward in order to give you an update on where we are on the support provided to host families through the Homes for Ukraine programme. And in order to try and make this more of a live presentation, we've actually managed to produce a video. June Marshall, who is here with us, is going to present that video, and that's been commissioned for this meeting in order to give us some direct update, if you like, from hosts within the city. There is now plenty of time for a discussion on this, because we have over an hour that is now scheduled for this item. John or Richard or John, do you want to make any introductory comments?
Just very briefly, because I think it's important that we hear the video, and also there's a very detailed report that we've circulated around. Just as I very much welcome that the scrutiny is engaging with us on this, it's also a really pertinent time to look at where we are. It's a year in February since Russia launched that brutal and illegal invasion of Ukraine. It's a year in March since the Homes for Ukraine and the family visa schemes were launched by government. There's been a lot of work and energy and effort that's gone in right across the city since then, from communities, from our amazing family of hosts that we have, from our partners and indeed the officers of the council. I'll be absolutely honest and upfront, I don't think we've got everything right. I also said that in answer to questions at council. It's been an unprecedented set of circumstances. The speed and the scale of the Ukraine programme has meant that it's been difficult and challenging. And Birmingham, of course, is hosting more guests than anywhere else. We've learned a lot, I think, from that experience and the difficulties, as well as the successes that we've seen. And we've had to learn at speed and often the hard way. So I think there's a lot for us to reflect on here today. There's been some really good practice. There's been some issues that we need to explore further. But just to say, I think what has happened overall in Birmingham stands in the very best traditions of this city as a city of sanctuary. And I think the response of the communities and people of this city in stepping forward and welcoming people from Ukraine fleeing that conflict has been absolutely admirable and stands, as I say, in the best traditions of Birmingham. Richard?
I've nothing to add at this stage, Chair. I'm keen to leave.
Okay, thank you very much. June, would you like to introduce the video?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So my title is Head of Public Participation. So thank you for the opportunity to provide you some feedback directly from our hosts. This is part of a programme of work that we're sort of launched in listening more directly from hosts and guests. This is an edited version of over 250 minutes of interviews with hosts, so I've got a lot more footage that is available if needed. But this pulls out some of the pertinent points that the host wants me to enable them to get across to you. So this is based on 10 interviews which I've undertaken. All of the hosts are hosting a different makeup of guests. Some people are just hosting one person. There's people in there hosting 4 people, family units, etc. And things are changing for us as well as we go along. So I'll press play because I think it's more important you hear from them and not me. Thank you.
I'm Elaine Simpson, and this is my husband Martin.
Hello.
We've been hosting for 6 months, and we initially hosted a lady called Marina and her 5-year-old son. Wow. And then about 2 months ago, 8 weeks, Marina's husband arrived as well, so we're now hosting him too.
Only that having people in our house has been, surprised us on every level, I think, in every way, and probably in a far more positive sense than we'd ever dreamed. Right? We our family grew by 3 people. That's what actually happened.
Lovely.
So we're that's not to say it's like a walk in the park. It's not a walk in the park. It's difficult. You share your house with people. You have to adjust everything. You have to be prepared to adjust everything in your lifestyle. And so do the guests that are coming. Everyone's making compromises. But when it works, it can be a magical thing.
Getting into school was difficult. We did a lot of applications for school, and initially everyone said no. About 12 different schools.
Wow.
And then we just basically went on waiting lists, and then eventually about 2 weeks into the new term, one of the schools contacted us and said they'd got a place. Yeah, especially once the dad arrived. Obviously they were quite keen to try and get independent housing, which is the right thing absolutely for everybody. We tried to find our own properties a little bit through Rightmove and Open Rent and that sort of thing. Most of the landlords just wouldn't even really go down the road of refugees or universal credit sort of situation. So we weren't really having any luck. But then with the support of the people from the group, we managed to find a flat nearby where the landlord was sympathetic to the situation. And so we're hoping they're going to get the keys at the end of the week and be able to move in. But again, That's kind of come through our own group, and it's come off our own back, really. We've kind of done the work for that, to be honest.
So, first of all, I was watching the news with my children when the war started in Ukraine, and we thought, no, this has actually never happened in Europe. And I personally came here as a refugee as well, but my circumstances were not as serious as the Ukrainian refugees here. So me and my children, we just decided that, you know what, we have got 2 spare bedrooms. So why can't we do something to help out these refugees? Yes, that was probably one of the most difficult issues that we had initially. Me, I'm a lecturer. I also teach ESOL in prison. And it was kind of difficult to find like a college who could offer ESOL classes. So we ended up, we did our own English at home, private lessons. Then we managed to get a place at a college nearby. But initially it was really difficult to access ESOL. As a refugee, I was supported by Refugee Council. Mm-hmm. At this time, I felt that they were not very involved in supporting the Ukrainian refugees. This is my honest opinion. Mm-hmm. The time they knocked on my door, it was actually too late. My guest ended up saying, "Why are they here? I've already integrated in the community. You've helped me to do at least everything that I needed. Now they're just walking in. You know, these are the very supposed to be supporting us in terms of even looking for ESOL classes, doing the resident permits and extra, etc., etc. But it wasn't like that."
My name is Teresa Demetrio. I've been a host for 9 months now, since the beginning of May. My guest is Victoria Zakova, a 40-year-old single lady from Kharkiv. So we contacted Matthew Bolton. We contacted the South Birmingham one in Digby. We contacted the Language Centre at the library, Brass House. The one nearest me, which is just down the road, but I can't remember the new name of it. So altogether, we must have contacted, I think, 8 or 9 different places to see, even like inner Birmingham, so like Saltley, you know, those type of places along there. And she went for assessments. And of course, a few of them said, "Oh, we'll be back in touch." And all of them said, no courses until September. No information whatsoever. Somebody came out and did a house visit. Told me I would then have to get a gas safety certificate, which as a householder and an ex-gas engineer, I would never need it. So 80 quid later, I had to pay for that myself. Then that was it, apart from her £200 that she had from the council. That was it. But nobody came out and gave us that, of course. Counselling and help with mental health issues, because the Ukrainian people will not admit to mental health issues. It is not. It is something that is frowned upon. It is like going back to the 18th century, when people, you know, wouldn't talk about it. If their relatives had mental health issues, they wouldn't talk about it. We are having in our homes very traumatised people. Some of them have lost everything, including family members, children, and we are not counsellors. We are not experience to deal with this?
I'm Richard Painter, and we first started hosting in, I think it was around the end of June of last year. We host a family of Svetlana, who is a mother of Leah, who is aged 17, and Yuri, aged 9. So Leah is the daughter, Yuri the son. No, we haven't had any input to that. Leah, the 17-year-old, is absolutely fluent. She must have done a lot of studying before she came, so she's absolutely fine. Svetlana goes to college on Mondays and Fridays. She sorted that out. Yuri is at school, but is taking additional coaching lessons on Zoom after school, and we had nothing to do with that. Not because we didn't want to, just because they didn't ask us.
Well, we're John O'Mara and Ruth Lockley, husband and wife, and we've been hosting now for 4 months, hosting Ivan and Vlada, 2 young people. Vlada's 19, Ivan is 18.
From very early on, I was worried about the universal credit because I've been following Facebook pages over the summer and seen that there might be a problem. I didn't really understand why, because Ukrainians here are allowed to apply for student loans to go to university in the UK, but there's no allowance for how their continuing education in Ukraine will be paid for. And their universities are going to quite great lengths to try and keep this education going. And my strong feeling is that we're spending billions on weapons, but at some point the country will have to rebuild itself. There'll be hundreds of thousands of young people coming out of armed forces, hopefully at some point. And bearing in mind what happened after the Second World War here, one of the things that's going to need to be available is higher education for them to be able to pick up. And therefore, why would we just say to people, oh, you can go to university in the UK, that's okay, but not support the continuing
education from Ukraine
of universities in the Ukraine? And so I had done 2 things. I had, after they came, I contacted the Department for Education and Science to ask about this equivalence of
grading
results, and was told very firmly, you go to the ENIC website and you put in their Ukrainian qualifications, you pay for translation, you pay for the service, and then we will churn out what the equivalent is. However, their universities took their original paperwork from their schools, and they're only part way, in Vlada's case, only 1 term into that university course. And so we have a qualification that they might get if they manage to finish the course, but we don't have completed qualification. And from what other people have told me, what the Ukrainian students that have applied for places in the UK have actually been judged not to be at A-level standard, and therefore at the very least have been asked to do a foundation year. So it just seems wrong to me how this is balancing out. They're up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do the online lectures. There seems to be a lot more lecture content than you would expect at a university in Great Britain. And there's a lot of testing and exams that they're also completing. They could work alongside that, but neither of them have yet managed to find a job.
I thought about it for around a month, I think, from when the war started in February 24th, wasn't it, last year? So obviously watching the news, there was obviously millions of people moving across Europe to get away from the hostilities that were occurring in Ukraine. I ummed and ahed about it for a while, particularly I had the space, I had the rooms available, so it wasn't a question of facilities or anything. I actually undid about it for a while, as I'm a man that lived on my own, and they were predominantly women, so I wasn't quite sure, and there was quite a lot of negativity on the various forums that you look at about that. But I thought, I'll face into the negativities. I know what my motivations are, and they're honourable. Therefore, I ultimately decided to do it. Yeah, so not something I've personally had to learn about. So it's very much a case of searching on the internet for ESOL opportunities. You've got the Birmingham ESOL Adult Education Centres. I'm also close to Walsall, so I reached out in the Walsall direction as well. Initially, I got, after much discussion or attempting to reach out to various charities, I managed to get the girls on a ESOL provision in Walsall. About a month later, that was followed up with a Birmingham ESOL course, and that was really good. One of the timing challenges I had was, this was April, May. They're all closing down for the summer, so there was very little provision. I managed to get them on a couple of days course through the summer holidays. So holidays period is something you need to think about. How do we cover that if we've got people coming in? Otherwise, they're just, you know, not learning quick enough, in my opinion. The courses that I did manage to get on, 1 hour, 2 hours a week, my guests were incredibly frustrated because they were keen to learn a lot faster. Bearing in mind, for all of that time frame, they're sitting, doing nothing, claiming benefits, etc. Because English is definitely the biggest barrier of getting these people integrated into the community, as well as working in the future. It took about 5 or 6 months on piecemeal pieces of ESOL to get to a conversational level. And as soon as we've got to a conversational level, they've started to get jobs.
My name is Nina. I've been hosting since the 24th of May a Ukrainian mother and her 13-year-old daughter. I think my guess might be the exception rather than the rule. Things have been quite difficult. At first, when she came, I'd have, I mean, in theory, when you're just told all you have to provide is a room and safe space for people. But there is a lot more to it than that. If their English is not very good, then quite often you end up getting involved with helping them with all of their paperwork. So I had to do all the appointments. So we did the doctors, the dentists, the opticians, the biometrics, the passport. And what would happen is that I'd end up having like a list of items to do. There were also things around the house that were difficult. They wanted or preferred to eat Ukrainian food and wouldn't try English. So we ended up, and they ate at different times. So whilst, the first few weeks we try and sort of like meet together at the dining room table, it became clear that the timings weren't the same. I would eat, say, at 8:30 for breakfast, 1 for lunch and 6 for tea. And they'd be sort of maybe 8:30 because of schools and things, maybe that time, but then 4 o'clock and 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So we were living like separate lives almost. Apart from when we had to go and do, various different appointments. And some of those appointments have not been easy either. Things like the doctors, and I mean, they've been very lucky. They've been able to get hospital appointments and a load of other things. But, having to organise all of that, it took over my life, really.
Yeah, my name's Naran Flynn, and we've been hosting guests. Guests arrived on the 29th of March 2022, and they were with us for 9 months. They've moved on to independent accommodation, private rental, which we supported them by becoming guarantors for them. Yeah, I think. Well, the challenge really was that in the first instance they got refused a lot by flats that they were looking at, because I think estate agents and landlords didn't recognise that they were going to be here for 3 years, that they had jobs, that they were stable, that they are. I mean, that was one of the first things that really upset me in supporting guests and hosts, was that I applied, I will say, I applied to Sutton Coldfield Charitable Trust for funding to support the guests when they first arrived, because, you know, we didn't have funding. And the feedback I got back was that the guests weren't Sutton Coldfield residents. And it's taken a long time for people to realise that actually these people are Sutton Coldfield residents, these people are Birmingham residents, they are going to be here a long time. And I think that now, as we're looking at flats and other accommodation, people don't feel that they're permanent members of the community, but they are, and they're getting jobs, and their children are established in schools. So I think that was one of the early frustrations, was trying to get landlords and estate agents to recognise that these people are here and they're here to stay.
Okay, so Phil and Ros Reynolds, we're initially hosting 2 Ukrainian ladies from the Kyiv area. We've been hosting since June of 2022, so 7 months. Yeah. In terms of the various services, I mean, both the council and non-council services, I mean, I think initially getting support, you know, from the job centre seemed, and the universal credit, it seemed quite confusing and inconsistent. There was contact and there were meetings, but I think it was quite hard for them to understand, you know, what they could access and what support they could access as well, alongside the universal credit to get to employment opportunities, you know, and training, like, you know, bus tickets and things like that, you know, costs, things like that. So I think that was a bit of an issue at the start, wasn't it?
And I guess that, I mean, we've not got any experience directly of universal credit, but actually, so through family members, my sister, she has some experience because she's worked in social housing. So I guess if you're coming to it and never had any experience, I think that is quite difficult to get your head around. And as Phil said, the lack of consistency. So they would go and see someone, but then they would see somebody else a different time and they get different information. Right. And that they were also genuinely wanting to kind of find work, and it wasn't necessarily hitting what they needed. The other thing is, as Phil said, they were incredibly proactive with around the English lessons and courses. So they were really trying to kind of target anything that they could get. I mean, their English was not bad already, but they wanted to improve that. And I think that's really key to unlocking job opportunities. And so I think that was quite frustrating in the beginning, because they had to get onto the ESOL, you have to be assessed. They were assessed and they were put on something that was totally inappropriate, and they were put on something that was English and maths, and then they were sending us pictures of the maths that they were doing, which was really basic, and they're professional ladies, and so it wasn't, you know, what they needed. So actually they actually found a different route through, and that was all credit to them in terms of how they found that. And it was a private college offering free places to Ukrainians.
3 months.
3 months, and it was intensive. And that's the other big thing, is there's a lack of intensive English courses. So because they came in June, you then hit the summer holiday.
Academic years with a problem.
Yeah, so there's nothing, and it's not intensive. And what they were wanting is intensive courses, you know, as I say, to unlock that work potential.
My name's Mary, and we've been hosting since May last year, 2021. And we have 2022, sorry. We have 4 guests, a mum, a grandmother, and 2 children aged 8 and 5. Well, we were quite early to the game, really, and I think things have got a lot better now, because looking at my emails from the council and from what you find on social media, there's a lot more information out there. And once I started joining Facebook groups for local Ukrainian societies, etc., it was much easier to access. But pretty much we had to wing it and try and find out the information ourselves. And it was on a need-to-know basis. Every time we thought, oh, what are we going to do about schools? What are we going to do about benefits? There was nothing, there was no sort of central area that you could go to. We had to find out for ourselves. And I think that's changed since last year. And I don't know how people are getting on now, but we did find it quite a struggle. And we were lucky because our Ukrainian mum speaks very good English. And as soon as she realised that she'd got a place, she started looking into what she might need. But the circumstances that they're in, I think Birmingham Council should come up with some kind of strategy to help people into private rentals so that they can be completely independent of the hosts without feeling like they've been left out in the cold, really. I think one of the main ones is the employment issue. Our lady guest is extremely highly qualified, and so far the only work she's been offered are much lower paid jobs that she doesn't feel that she should be offered because she has qualifications and wants to use them, and she wants to use her brain and get out there and be part of the workforce. And she doesn't want to be a cleaner. She doesn't want to pick fruit. She doesn't want to feel like she's a lesser person because she's living in a country that really, through no fault of her own, she finds herself. And there's very little we can do to help that. I think the issue with council tax for us, that was an issue. I contacted the Birmingham City Council because our properties normally let to other people, so we don't pay the council tax. And because the Ukrainians had moved into that house, I notified the council to let them know that I would take over, and could they let me know of any discounts that would be applicable. And that was in June 2022. And today, the 23rd of January, was the day that I actually got a result. Right. And I think we're in the position where, OK, it was annoying, but we were able to take on that amount of money. But I don't think it's very fair that people have to fight to get a discount for hosting a family or one person even. But yes, we persevered. We managed to get it, but it was a very bad service. I have to say, it was very bad service, and no total lack of communication between departments and no response.
Councillor, if I just may, just to clarify, Patricia mentioned Refugee Council. She really referred to refugee action, and to be honest, all of these people gave their time up to talk to me completely voluntarily, and a lot of it was in the evening, so I didn't want to go back and say, could we re-record that bit to get the right name, so please forgive us on that. I also mentioned the girls. I've been to a social event with these two girls. They're highly professional young ladies who are 34-year-olds, and they're twins. So you don't refer to them as the girls, but they are actually very intellectually good.
Thank you very much, June. Colleagues, this item is on the agenda today because at the December meeting of Council, that's the 6th of December, the City Council passed a resolution on the Ukraine issue, and it specifically in that resolution asked that scrutiny asks host families to provide evidence when carrying out so that in carrying out an assessment of the scheme, we can properly understand, the City Council can properly understand and address the issues and ensure improvements are introduced where possible. In talking this over with the scrutiny officers and indeed Richard, I felt that we could enhance the process by getting evidence directly from hosts. Now, I know we've had a limited number of people, but I think we've actually had a good coverage of the issues. There's a more theoretical, if I can put it, background document, which is part of the report to this committee. But I think what you've heard today with this video is something that brings Richard's report alive. And that's what I hope would happen by taking it forward this way. Now, I've already got 3 members who've asked to comment. I've now got 4. I'm going to take those members first. If our guests who are themselves hosts want to comment, then I'm quite prepared, once I've heard from the members, to take any comment that you yourselves might want to make. But I'll start with, and perhaps members can bear in mind, we've got 35 minutes or thereabouts. Kerry, first of all.
Thanks, Chair. And I've got quite a few questions, I'm afraid, but John, and I'm grateful for your introduction to it, and we've had numerous conversations about this. And, you know, there's no doubt it's been a really challenging time for the council because of the speed and you know, the situation because of the war in Ukraine. So I think we're very, we accept that, but we know that there have been real problems. And Ron Albert talks about bringing the report alive, and I think we need to do that because I don't necessarily think that, and no disrespect, Richard, but I don't necessarily think that it gives true gravitas to the level of challenge that our Ukrainian guests and their hosts have faced. So I think there are some key things just to mention on. So the refugee action contract, I mean, that was a big contract, 6.3 million. And when we're listening to the lived experience of hosts on that video, and as councillors, we all have heard lots of lived experience from hosts and from our refugee guests. It seems that a lot of the support that has been provided to our refugees have been provided by our hosts and volunteers in our communities. And those volunteers and hosts have not always, a lot of the time, been given any support to be able to do that. And I think that's something that we really need to, recognise and address going forward, because as much as we'd like to think that this is the last time that we ever have to open our doors to refugees in this city, we know that that's not true. So there are some real important lessons to be learned going forward, so that both hosts and refugees feel as though we are really supporting them as a city of sanctuary. And I know, John, it's really important to you, but we have to get those basics right. And some of those basics in terms of school places where refugee children are treated exactly the same in terms of priority as all the other children in our city. And on the one hand, I can understand that because there has to be a fair process. But these children and young people are not the same as all of the other children in our cities. That, you know, they have been removed from their homes, from their country, from their friends, from their families, and are fleeing war. So they are in a very different situation. And one of the hosts talked about the mental health challenges, and I think that's a really important thing to note. And, you know, there is stigma around mental health. There is in this country, there is in many countries. So we have to make sure that those services are in place for our refugees to access. The other big issue, and the schools issue, John, is massive. And you know, I've had so many families contact me about school places, and we heard from the video that it's been left to hosts to try and resolve those issues. And that's a really difficult process for hosts. That a lot of our hosts, you know, they're older, that they haven't got children in the process. They don't know how things have changed over the past decade or 2 decades, and it's really complex, as well as the benefits process is really complex. And the other big issue is the housing problem. So Spring Housing were commissioned to work with to provide some housing and everything else. But I know that I've had refugees in my ward that have been told, I'm selling the house, so you have to find somewhere else to live, and you've got a week to find somewhere, or you know, end of the 6 months, that's it now, you have to go. And there are reasons behind that for some of the hosts. You know, it's been difficult for some of the hosts, and we heard that in the video. But we've also had some unscrupulous people within the city taking advantage of the scheme, not necessarily in my ward, and then booting people out. So there's been a precipice where our families are falling over the edge because the support hasn't been in place. And in some areas, like in Moseley, I've had some really good organisations and volunteers pick those people up and stop them from falling and help them. So I think lessons do have to be learned. but we really have to get it right now for our people, because there are big amounts of money being spent, on these contracts. The PricewaterhouseCoopers contracts mentioned, and we know there's been a lot of questions around that, John. We've had these conversations already, so I'm not going to repeat them. So it's the lack of support for hosts, but it's the lack of support for the refugees as well, in terms of the simple things that could make their lives much, much better, in terms of bus passes, school places, access to education, and ESOL and everything else. So I just want those reassurances.
Don, I'm going to take members in groups of 3. Try and therefore get everybody in who wants to speak. So can I just remind members that they do need to keep it as short, as brief as possible. Alex and Ewan. Alex first.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's going to be hard to keep it brief, but I'll certainly endeavour. I also want to draw attention to the petition that was submitted to Council as well, which asked for an independent investigation of both management and value for money of the contract with the refugee action. And Councillor Jenkins has already started off in terms of the concerns which have been raised by many councillors across Council, to the Cabinet Member, to Richard, regarding the RA contract. And I think it's been useful in terms of the video that we've heard. A lot of the comments which I picked up was that hosts had to do everything, that they relied on groups, social media groups in themselves. We had to do our own lessons. We initially found it very difficult. We had to search by ourselves. We had to, and there was very little support from this RA contract. So going back to the original timeline, as I understand it, the RA contract was awarded on the 1st of June. Now, this was done under delegated authority. It was not calling the ball, contrary to what the Cabinet Member said at full council. So this was no opportunity that we could challenge. In terms of being rolled out, now, I note in the papers that were submitted, even in October, the RA contract, it says in the paperwork, was still offering more support. It was still doing training. It was still getting the staff together. So these are the crucial periods in which the host need their support. And everything that we're talking about basically goes to, the government has given the council £10.5 million in government funding. Now, I understand it was £7.2 million, a substantial amount of money was given to this one organisation at speed, and they were chosen because we understand that they were chosen because they had the ability to quickly deliver. They had the staff, the capacity, and the experience too. Now, questions have been raised around the lead person who's running RA. I don't know if Richard can speak on that. Perhaps you can put an opinion on that, whether he is an appropriate person to be running and leading the RA contract, whether proper procurement processes were not done at speed. And then the RA contract asks for, and in terms of what they've been asked to deliver, includes welfare, sponsor support, initial accommodation, DBS checks, which I'm not sure has been done, ESOL referrals, engagements, immigration advice for housing, health care. And it seems from so many hosts that I've spoken to is that hosts themselves have had to do all these things at speed. And they've been very much left alone, unable to do this and to have to fight for support themselves. And I think this goes to the very heart of the appropriateness of this contract, which is why the full council motion went to full council in December. I've got this petition from over 100 host families, which represents a sizable number of people who are already hosts. Now, if I may, Chair, if I can pause there, perhaps I can get a response to the 2 points from Councillor Kerry and Jenkins and myself, because I think those two go together. And there's a second point, which I may, if I can raise through you, which is slightly on a different tangent.
We'll take Ewan, though, before I move this on. Ewan?
Yeah, my question is slightly different, so I'm going to keep it brief. First item there, first couple of Mr. and Mrs. Simpson, they were talking about family they were hosting and they were about to get the keys for their property. I was just wondering, were they successful in the end of actually moving into that property? And I was intrigued as to how that worked.
Answer is yes.
Yeah, I saw some nodding in the corner there. And so I was intrigued with the mechanics of that, because obviously normally, you know, you move into a property, the property is 6 months contract, something like that. But obviously, the very nature of what we've got here is the unknown, isn't it? With Ukraine, you know, people may or may not be able to be repatriated, or if that's the correct word, sooner than they're expecting, depending on how quickly things change out there. So I'd be intrigued to know what the mechanics of that side of things was. And I was obviously disappointed to hear the family who applied to a charity asking for money to be told that it was only for people from that locale. And I was just wondering if that was a common response from charities, etc., and if that changed over the period, because I know these Coalfield Town councils, they have a similar scenario that they can only pay money obviously within the area, but they still did things to help people coming over from Ukraine. So I'm just wondering if that was a stance that was able to change by bodies as they understood the enormity of what's happening, because I think it's caught a lot of people on the hop, and some people may have rushed to some points of view that they may wish to reflect longer on before they made that decision, shall we say. Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm going to take some comments from Richard and John now. But what's clear to me, both from the video and particularly the comments that came from Kerry and Alex, is that this committee perhaps needs to do a bit of focus work around the contract that was taken up by Refugee Action, because I think there are some serious questions being asked about the way in which that contract has been followed up. So I just put that down on the table at this moment in time. I don't think we can answer the questions here this afternoon. I think it may require a bit of focus work by coordinating O&S. Richard, John, whichever first.
If I could be helpful on that last point, Chair, Tim Norhilton, who's the Chief Exec of Refugee Action, is actually here with us today and may want to offer some response to the points that have been made. And so Sabarai, who's the officer lead for this area. So I think there's a number of points in those questions that I'm sure Tim and Saba will also want to reflect upon. Just a couple of points from me, if I may, before I hand over to the officers. I think, Kerry, you're absolutely right about the need for us to draw some strong learning from, as I said at the outset, not everything has gone to plan, not everything was perfect in the first place. Certainly with regard to housing matters, you'll know that we've now put some move-on arrangements in place around payments to guests, and also we've increased the payment to hosts as well to ensure that there is some extra stability and that hosts are properly supported to keep the guests for longer. And we'll continue to review that. We've also now got a engagement group that meets together with hosts and guests, so we can tease out a number of the issues that clearly reflect in the early days of our response to this that weren't actioned as quickly. I think we're now in a stronger place to be able to do that. There's a number of points that I think are better picked up by Tim, Sabra and Richard. However, I just wanted to be clear about the comment that was made with regard to what I said at full council. Can I be clear that in that, the question I was asked was about the September Cabinet report. If you revisit the recording of that meeting, that was the report that I stated was called in the vault, and indeed it was subject to calling. The earlier report was not subject to calling. That was done at some speed over in the spring, has been referenced, but I just wanted to be clear about what I was actually referring to at that council meeting.
Richard, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. If I may, if I could take us back to February, March of last year, I think it's really difficult now to really remember what it was like at that time when Russia had just invaded Ukraine in terms of the information that we had available. We were in a situation of huge uncertainty. So we, at that point, had to make some, estimates is too strong a word, but we had to make some assumptions about the scale of the challenge that we would be facing. And we had very little idea about whether we would be facing hundreds, thousands or tens of thousands of arrivals. In previous refugee schemes, large cities like Birmingham have taken disproportionately more arrivals. It's extremely unusual for a scheme such as Homes for Ukraine for the core cities to have relatively fewer arrivals and for larger numbers of people to be going to more affluent areas. So we took some very early judgment calls about how many people we were expecting to arrive, and we thought that we would be facing very significant demand very, very quickly. In that environment, we were also faced with a completely novel scheme. So the unique element of Homes for Ukraine is the matching of guests with sponsors, and what we have discovered is that the range of needs and expectations is just incredibly broad. And if I'm honest, I think we didn't adequately anticipate the range of needs that we would need to support, and no one was used to doing this. So no one really in the UK had experienced a scheme like this. So we had to make the best decisions that we could in that environment about providing a good level of support. Other core cities we now know actually took different choices. In other core cities, the expectation is that hosts will simply rely on mainstream services without any commission supporting organisation, except in cases of crisis. There's a very wide range of different arrangements across the UK. In many respects, the arrangements that Birmingham have put in place are more generous in terms of the support that they offer for hosts and guests. So we have, for example, we increased the payments to hosts. We arranged a bus pass scheme that operates for 3 months, whereas most of the other core cities don't have any such scheme. And we've recently launched the Housing Move On scheme, which provides a package of support of £3,000 to £4,000 in value for moving on guests. And we've developed that scheme in really close partnership working with local community organisations and hosts to try and get it right for them. What I absolutely accept is that with the benefit of hindsight, we would have done things differently. And the three big lessons that I would draw, if I may, are that first of all, we should have engaged community groups earlier in this process. We didn't do that sufficiently, I think, in the first months of the crisis. We are now doing so properly, and we're seeing the benefits of that. Secondly, I would, again, with the benefit of hindsight, have commissioned a wider range of support at an earlier stage in order to spread the risk. And I would really appreciate it if Tim could comment from his perspective, because he's had to face the challenge of providing this support through his commissioned organisation. And thirdly, I think we underestimated the importance of our coordinating and enabling role as a city council, not so much as a provider of services or a single commissioning point, but as the facilitator of a network across the city. And we have tried to learn the lessons of that and implement that in our cost of living response, where we've had a much stronger emphasis on supporting the broad network of organisations across the city right from the start of our response. So I guess just circling back, at the time we took what we believed were the right decisions on the basis of the information that we had in a very uncertain environment. With hindsight, there are definitely things that we would do differently, and I would say that we are now engaged in a different way in order to improve the support that is available to hosts.
Thank you very much, Richard. Tim, I didn't know that you were going to be here today. I think I'm going to allow you to just make a short comment because things have been said, and that would be appropriate. But I do think that this is a matter which this committee may have to come back and look at again at some point. So I'm acknowledging your presence and giving you that opportunity. But could you please keep it brief, and I will return to some of the issues around what has been said and the contract, etc., in another place.
Yeah, thank you. Tim, the Hilton, the Chief Executive Refugee in Action, and just to give a little bit of background to Refugee Action, we provide support across the UK, people in the asylum system, helping people out of homelessness. We set up the Lift Van campaign to get the right to work for people who are in the asylum system that Birmingham City Council signed up to. We provide support for community groups, training around immigration advice as well. We provide a range of services, and we've been embedded in Birmingham for 20 plus years as well. But a really core part of our work from the moment we were founded 40 plus years ago, it was around resettlement. We were founded to support Vietnamese evacuees and worked with Bosnians, Kosovans, a whole range of different nationalities. And then we were one of the biggest resettlement refugee resettlement support providers over the last 70 years through the neighbourhood protection programme. I'll give that as context because we've been right at the heart of all the discussions around the best way and most appropriate ways of delivering refugee resettlement support. We deliver the Syrian refugee resettlement programme in Birmingham and also the Afghan programme as well. So really core part of what we do, but we also completely acknowledge that there's huge amounts of learning. So some of the elements of this programme are absolutely in line with all the refugee resettlement work we've previously done. There are some really, really novel elements that lots of colleagues have captured. And so one of the challenges we faced at that early stage was, first of all, developing a completely new model that built on the empowerment and independence building approach that we take around refugee resettlement. But to do that, where there were new elements in place, so the support and the role of hosts and how those bits would connect between our support and host and the guest, but also other elements like taking on housing checks, DBS checks, all the range of things that were brought into play with this completely new programme. And then the sheer scale and speed. So we had in place through our Afghan refugee resettlement support work, a team that took on, scaled quickly to work with the oncology cases that came in March before Homes for Ukraine was announced. We were already scaling up quickly at that point and also able, with the first Homes for Ukraine, to be able to provide the £200 payment, to build that into our systems. But there are lots of other areas where we struggle to be able to scale up. And I completely recognise the comments in the video and comments that councillors have made around the challenges in those first few months of scale. That is ultimately reflected in the reduced tariff for that first period. We would just want to recognise the incredible thing that hosts have done in taking on support, bringing people into their houses and providing that support for people who fled war. And some of the things that are captured in the video are really deep-lying issues that we see on all of our refugee programmes. Lack of ESOL, people being forced into low-skilled jobs, landlords not wanting to take people on, lack of mental health support. But I also recognise that the things that people are talking about in that video, that the hosts are talking about, are areas that we support with around, and we provide that support on other refugee resettlement programmes. And for those first few months, the scale and the speed of the mobilisation meant we recognised people didn't get that support. But what I want to say is that our team have worked incredibly hard to be able to catch up on that, to be able to put in place all the systems and processes so that people can be met on arrival or very shortly after arrival, and all the things that council have pointed out in terms of the support that we're supposed to provide in the contract is now much more back on track. And it's a huge program, right? And just this week we have teams and members of our team out working intensively with new arrivals into the system, supporting putting DBS checks in, or sorting DBS checks out for new hosts, doing housing checks, providing follow-on casework. We've got members of our team doing a survey of people who arrived since November around ESOL, so we can make a business case to DWP. But I think one of the really kind of things we're proud of with the service that we've been able to develop after that initial mobilisation challenge of those few months is around the complex safeguarding work. So this is incredibly complicated work, right? And what we've been able to do is put in place, draw in staff who've got experience in complex safeguarding work in domestic violence, social work and homelessness settings, and be able to navigate some of those really complicated situations where relationships have broken down between hosts and guests, and set up a system for rematching and the complex support that's provided in that process, all the elements that are needed. And we've also been able, because of our kind of relationships more on a national basis, we have a corporate partnership relationship with Airbnb, which has nothing to do with the funding of this programme. And we've been able to put people who fall in between some of the where relationships have broken down into Airbnb support to smooth that process into new rematching arrangements. But we completely acknowledge that for those in the first few months, when it's really, really needed for many of those first few arrivals, we did not provide support in the way that we we'd hope to be able to.
Thanks, Tim. Right. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. I'm going to bring Alex back in. I've got Roger and I've got Shaman. I'll take those three contributions. Alex, just if you can just reflect, look, there are possibly some matters here which I will need to come back to outside of this meeting. But over to you, and it looks like I've got Mick as well. So,
put my hands up as well, Chair.
Well, I'm sorry, some of you are not going to be able to speak. Alex, and then Roger and Shaman.
There's lots of good comments that the hosts have made. For example, informants, I saw refugee action once, and that was it. The experience is negative. I've held abuse from 2 employees from refugee action. There was no help. They contacted us after 4 months of staying here. I don't want to describe this as an organisation that does not help at all. We used to write letters, it's confusing, they don't understand what they're doing. They came to us 5 months after arrival. So there's 4 points very quickly, Chair. ESOL's been mentioned. Now, in the contracts, £50,000 or £175,000 for 100 adults has been made as provision for ESOL. There's a question on where that money's gone. You mentioned the complex DBS checks, and now you've got the process is put in place, but there seems there's plenty of process for very little outcomes, because what we're seeing is that these DBS checks should have been done at the very outset. So the question is, who is coming over to Ukraine and where are they in place? And these checks should have been done at the very outset, and I'm not sure they've been done. The question fundamentally is, what is residents and council getting for this RA contract? And the contract terms as well, in terms of it being 7.2 million for 1,000 people over 18 months. Now, we're seeing some people who've arrived after the first 6 months of the contract. We're not up to, I think it's 800 at the moment. It's some 780 people at the moment. So there's a question around the clawback. What happens if people stay for 6 months and then they leave? I think there are terms which need to be questioned around that. And then very quickly, in terms of the decision not to do any procurement, why your organisation was chosen. I acknowledge the lessons learned by Richard in terms of engaging with community risk, spreading the risk. But the fundamental question is, why was your organisation chosen? Why was it not spread out? Were the necessary checks done? Does your staff have the equipment and the capability and the numbers to actually carry out the work at that point when the contract is awarded? And moving on to the question, the issue around PwC contract has also been raised. So very quickly, £330,000 for a database that only this council has developed. No other councils have needed this. And the question to the cabinet member is, it says repeatedly over and over again in the papers that the tool that PwC started to develop through their pro bono engagement work meant that the data could be securely contained in one place, etc. So it seems that the pro bono work that was done free of charge basically led to, informed and necessitated this new contract in the database in £330,000. So my question is this a standard process? Do we give pro bono work which basically ties in council to a very expensive process and program and database that we don't need? And I think this should form part of the wider inquiry if we do take that forward, Chair.
Let me try and influence what other members might be wanting to say here. I'm going to propose at the end of this, we set up a little task and finish group to look at a number of the issues that are now arising in the conversations. I'm going to chair it myself. I will ask Kerry, Alex and Roger to sit on it. And that will pick up on the various issues that I think members are beginning to talk about and ask questions about. I'm hoping the proposal I'm going to make, therefore, will cut short some of the comments that otherwise might be made. Roger.
Thank you, and that has cut short my comment because there were some strong points I wanted to make, but I'm happy to make them in that address. Very important issues there. I want to just make a couple of new points. One is that if we get this right, this way of dealing with on the ongoing Ukrainian situation, but as Kerry said, there will be future crises in the future that bring more refugees into this country. This is potentially the voluntary sector bit. I welcome the acknowledgement that has been made that we did not engage properly with the voluntary sector. I'm very glad that's been made. But we have been here before, and perhaps most appositely with the COVID crisis, where the quickest, most immediate response that was delivered in the community was by the voluntary sector. Clearly, the council has a huge role to play, and did play, and will play in providing the infrastructure behind that. But in terms of the quick, immediate response to crisis of many, many natures, the voluntary sector is absolutely central and gets there quickest. And therefore, when we have the discussions about how we coordinate response. The voluntary sector must be included right at the beginning, not brought in a few months later to talk about that. And that is actually a fundamental lesson to this. We've said those sorts of things before, but we didn't do it here. A very specific question, which is in terms of one thing that's not mentioned in this report is whether TA has been used. Now, I'm aware there is a case where a Ukrainian refugee ended up in TA. What I would want to know, and then we've got out of TA not by the paid support, but by the voluntary sector. Is that a single one-off case? Has there been anyone else who's ended up in TA? Because basically, given the support that's here, if someone ends up in TA, that's a failure. And then in the other flip side of that is one of the things the council clearly should be doing, and we've seen it across many different sectors, is influencing partners to make sure they provide the support that's needed. Have we fully gone to the private rented sector and tried to influence them to provide, to look at the Ukrainian refugees coming into the system, to get them to be more sympathetic and open? I think, clearly there'll be some people that won't be interested. The private rented sector is extremely diverse, and I'm sure there are lots of landlords who would be sympathetic, but perhaps didn't understand, and we've got links through the private rented sector forum and so on. Did we use those to try and ensure that the private rented sector, that there was sufficient sympathetic landlords to enable Ukrainians who come to the end of their hosting placements to move smoothly and sympathetically into the private rented sector? Because we should have been doing that.
Thank you. Some issues of the Ukraine refugee are facing are showing a weakness in our system, lack of housing, lack of school places. Something I didn't mention, seen on the video, is access to doctors. So that's probably playing a role, but it needs mental health for other support, and so I'm surprised that anything can be mental. But it's always the weakness of our system. So regarding Ukraine refugees, while there's statistics that we seem to be not effective in the roaring. So what I want to know is how many of these refugees here in our city who are still facing lack of housing, lack of school places, and other sport. So, and what we're doing for? Do you have any
colleagues? The answers to some of these questions we'll pick up in this task and finish group. Mick?
None of the questions, thank you, Chair. None of the questions I will be through the task and finish group. This is an observation, a comment really outside the council. I do a lot of work in mental health. I was under the impression, you may be able to correct me on this, that the Refugee Council had got links with Birmingham Therapeutic Services to do some online and telephone counselling work, either on group work or on a one-to-one basis. Now, I know that some communities don't pick that service up for whatever, for a variety of reasons. Are the Ukrainian refugees aware that this service exists and they say no to it, or are they just not aware of it? Thank you.
Very quickly, Kerry, you're the last.
I'll pass now, Albert, from what you said, that, the task and finish work, we can pick that up.
Fine, and I'm going to ask for a response. Richard, are you? We've got only a few minutes. Richard, John, and then I'm going to take one of our guests, a host, for a comment from them, and that will finish off this particular item.
Thank you. Just very quickly on a factual point. We do have a small number of guests in temporary accommodation at the moment. So I believe that we have 9 households at the moment in temporary accommodation out of a population of 319 at the moment, Homes for Ukraine households. And what is generally happening is these people are passing through temporary accommodation onto stable accommodation. But I'm happy to provide detail on that to Councillor Harmer subsequently. Can I just make briefly the point that we are trying to do a lot more for this group of refugees than we have ever done for any other previous group of arrivals, and that is the right thing to do. But it is proving challenging. It's establishing new challenges, but it's really important, as Councillor Harmer said, that we try and take the lessons of this into future arrivals. One brief comment, if I may, on the PricewaterhouseCoopers contract, because I know this is controversial. The PricewaterhouseCoopers offered pro bono work in the early stages of this of the crisis. At the end of that pro bono work, I took the judgment that it was good value to continue their work for money. It did not necessitate, the pro bono work did not necessitate the subsequent work, but I felt that the work that they had done was sufficiently valuable to invest further resources in, and as a result we kept control of the data. And I was very strongly informed in my thinking here by the experience of Kensington and Chelsea in the aftermath of the Grenfell disaster, when they lost control of the data and it caused them enormous problems with and that was a relatively small community of people. We expected larger numbers of arrivals, but I felt at the time that the control of the information was important enough to justify significant investment of public money.
John?
I think Richard has covered most of the points that I wish to make. I do think that the pertinent thing that Roger raised there, and also Shannon's point as well, around how this has illustrated some of the wider challenges in the system that are experienced not just by Ukrainian guests of this city, but also other refugees and indeed other citizens in Birmingham. And also, I think we need to just be mindful in discussing what we're doing around Ukraine, that we also have a set of needs of other refugee communities within the city as well. That was also something we reflected in that motion that we took through council, and we know that there's an even greater lack of support to many others who seek refuge here, something else that we need to continue to challenge. But there is a lot of learning, I think, that can come from what we've been through with the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and also very happy to cooperate, Chair, with the task and finish work that you're looking to pursue with regard to the contract.
Very much, John. Right, I'm going to give the last word to one of our guests.
Thank you very much, Chair. For all those here and all those live streaming, my name is Simone Sheffman. I've been a host for 7 months. Since April, I have 9 people living with me on and off, not all together. So I'm a host, but I've also been, I believe, instrumental in supporting in Birmingham and wider West Midlands on the integration and settlement support, as well as having helped to bring about 420 Ukrainians to Birmingham and the wider West Midlands into safe shelter and passage. I want to really commend Birmingham City Council, not just as a city of sanctuary in name, but in the way that it's moved to support the Ukrainian refugees. And I want to really adhere and support Roger Harmer, Councillor Harmer today, and other councillors who are really keen to make sure that this is across the city for all refugees and asylum seekers. And we really find that this is a template for better way of supporting migrant communities who we should really celebrate coming to be part of our wonderful city and country. That said, this scheme, as Councillor Harmer's also said, you had posts at your fingertips. You had people who had put themselves on the line to welcome someone for a minimum 6 months, could be a year, to live with you, a whole family you didn't know from Adam, coming from a war-torn place, in distress, with a rucksack, maybe a crying child or two. You had volunteers at your fingertips. We, I say a collective we, across the country really, but let's just speak for Birmingham. Let's just speak for where we are, myself and Mosley. We built communities, we built focus groups, we had hubs. They're still very active. At your fingertips to try and learn, be together, support, integrate, do the best we could collectively. And yet, whilst those dripped along doing all the legwork, one or perhaps two, but certainly one delivery organisation was given an enormous contract to deliver the services that, frankly, the hosts with their guests, if their English was good enough, and some voluntary organisations across the country, across the region, across the city, have delivered. Let me make that clear. Let me also make it clear that hearing from so many guests the painful words, I've been threatened and harassed by caseworkers, councillors around this table, I'm telling you, is painful to hear. These people have left a war, They're traumatised, and this shouldn't be happening.
Thank you very much.
Let's learn a better way. Let's improve collectively. This is cross-party support from the 6th of December. There were 100 and something plus hosts on that petition. There are hundreds of Ukrainians here who are loving being in the United Kingdom and the support and open welcome we give. Please, let's use this as the template for other refugee communities. Let's get it right now, not in 3 months, because some of us do not have the stamina. There are also mental health aspects on hosts because of some of the damage caused. I just finally want to end. The last 3 or 4 months, Birmingham City Council's officers have massively, if I can be bold enough to say, stepped up, been inclusive and hugely engaged with hosts and guests. There's been a transformation in support, and that's a really, really good direction for us to find a better path through this. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the councillors and for a cabinet member and for the officers for that support. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to finish by thanking you all for the contribution today. I think this has been an excellent hour plus. I do want to simply confirm that I'm going to set up a task and finish group. Myself, Kerry, Alex and Roger. I would hope or expect, Richard, that the resource behind that would come from your own team. Just as in the report to come, I've used customer services support to bring a resource behind a task and finish activity. I will get a remit for the task and finish group put together over the next few days. And I would hope to be able to, because I think there's some immediacy here, to actually bring the task and finish group into action quite quickly. I need that remit, I think, put together in order to put some boundaries into what it is the task and finish group might look at. Thank you all once again. I'd like to move on to item 8. Now, I've got with me on, thank you, Richard. I've got with me on mine, I think, yes, faces now come up in a way which I can recognise. We've got Wendy Griffiths, the head of customer services, and also I think I can see Nikki Spencer, who's delivery manager within customer services, who's been responsible for bringing some of the reports together. What we've got before us is, if you like, the sign-off of the first phase of the task and finish group's work, where all 4 services, that is bereavement services, housing repairs, waste management and highways, have now been looked at and by the task and finish group, and reports brought forward, the last of which is the highways one, which is here for the first time. There is an update which I brought forward on bereavement services as a result of some discussions with Wendy and the head of bereavement services. The recommendations aren't changed, but there's a bit of infill on detail, which makes the recommendations a lot more understandable, etc. So that's coming forward and will need to be noted today. But as I say, the recommendations on bereavement services do not change. It's a little bit of detail that's been added so that the recommendations are more understood. Wendy, is there anything, or Nikki, anything either of you would like to say at this stage?
I think just that the task and finish groups have been really helpful. It's been really collaborative with the service areas, with the customer services team and with members, just to really get underneath the skin of what the issues are and how we now start to transition that discovery work into implementing solutions. So we want lasting change. We don't want temporary sticking plasters. And I think that level of scrutiny has just enabled us to get into a level of detail that we probably wouldn't have if we hadn't have gone round the loop again and really tested it. So just to thank you for the scrutiny chairs that have been part of those working groups, really, because I know this is a lot of time, but hopefully it will be worth it. And as we start to get those lasting solutions coming through, we should play that, that should play the benefits back.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. Shaman?
It is related to the barrier.
Sorry?
To the barriers, schooling or that is recommended here.
Those you've had before, Shaman, they went through the committee in December, but this is just an update with some detail.
I have a query on it. Relating to code B, it says wildlife can have a negative impact on grave sites, which can be threatening for the family. I know this has that's to the families, but recommended on summaries communicating the residents that wildlife can be eaten in their garden. But that's not the answer to your solution. What the family want is how this can be prevented. Well, what measures can we take to stop the wildlife causing destruction to the grave?
Shaman, that's the question which can be answered by bereavement services initially, and there is an attempt to do so in the answer that's in here. But I'm not sure there's much that Wendy can add at this moment in time. Jack, you'll have to be very short.
It is. In the insight page on point C, some grave sites are not well maintained over time, and the recommendation is to communicate with relatives their responsibility of maintaining the grave.
Yeah. We were talking about that as well.
What happens when those relatives are no longer alive?
Right. We'll pick that up. Wendy will note that, and it will be a conversation that Wendy will have from customer services with bereavement services. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
I welcome announcement in the but there is not the project officer. Extension. I'm fine, 6 o'clock, but I can get the summertime, the time may be extended up to 9 p.m.
I thought bringing an update on bereavement services might result in this. This was all down in the report you saw in December. And that's a question you could have asked in December. But we'll note it. Wendy can pick it up with Nadila Nasir, who's the head of bereavement services, and we'll come back and give you an answer to that. Wendy, that okay? Yep. Fine. Right. I'm going to turn to the recommendations. I know I'm hurrying you because I'm trying to get this meeting over by 11:30. If I turn to the recommendations, 2.1 is noting that Task and Finish Group has completed its review of the recommendations submitted to service leads for bereavement services, housing, repairs, waste management and highways. The highways one you're seeing for the first time today. Agrees that the Task and Finish Group should take further action to ensure that the identified end-to-end customer service improvements are implemented. I think that's extremely important and lies very much behind the report that we're taking to Council in February, where there will be a scrutiny business report of which this customer service work will be part of that report. It is absolutely important that we sit behind customer services trying to ensure that the recommendations are taken forward. To that end, I have a meeting next week with Wendy and the Chief Executive, and one of the issues will be how do we keep the focus on these recommendations? How do we get the implementation of these recommendations in an appropriate timescale? The third recommendation is support the further work of the Task and Finish Group to scrutinise how senior managers are responding to feedback from the customer standards workshops to embed the customer service strategy. And that is, that we've said to you before, is the next strand of the work, as well as the implementation strand that the Task and Finish group will follow up on. Wendy, is there anything you want to add before I put those recommendations to members?
Just that the customer service training, we have designed it for employees that are online and those that are equally not online. So we'll provide that update at the next session, but it's just to give some assurance really that captures all employees through a variety of different channels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kerry?
Yeah, just really briefly, Chair, thank you. I just wanted to sort of reassure Jack really with this document that these very brief points in column 2, they have been, there were quite wide discussions with Wendy and Nikki and others about all of those points. So I think these are just very basic, summary of those discussions. And it was cross-party Task and Finish.
Yeah. They are very basic compared to the discussions that took place at the Task and Finish. Those Task and Finish groups on each service lasted about 2 hours. So it wasn't a superficial discussion. Okay, agree the recommendations. Thank you very much. Can I move on then to item 9, which is the scrutiny work programme. I've already said that we will be taking a scrutiny business report to council in February. We will report on the Task and Finish group from this committee, the inquiries that have come from the other committees, and there'll be a reference to the work that Alex is taking forward on domestic abuse. So that's what we're trying to get drafted into the report, which will go out with the council agenda early next week. Can I take them in order? What you've got is, first of all, the work programme for this committee. And are there any questions on coordinating? No. Sorry.
Clarify one point. The work programme is for the next 3 months.
Yeah.
Next meeting is focusing on the single issue for domestic abuse. I just want to get the committee sense of the Task and Finish group on the refugee Ukraine programme. Do you want to programme that to report back to the committee at some stage?
It will report back.
Yeah.
It depends on the speed in which I can move this as to when we report back. That's why I want the terms of reference sorted over the next few days.
Yeah, but just so the committee's aware that that's the...
Yeah, well, this will obviously be added to the work programme since it's come up during the course of this meeting.
Yeah, timing my chair would be March or April.
Yeah, well, I'm going to try and move it quickly, Alex, as quickly as possible. But I think some of these issues can't be just swept away under the carpet. Okay, I'm going to turn to them in order. Commonwealth Games, Jack, anything there?
No, apart from just a slight change in we were going to add to our work programme stuff to do with the car parking charges that were being consulted on, but that is no longer happening. And our inquiry is moving, it's just closed as well, that we're leading on, and we'll be reviewing evidence and compiling recommendations very soon.
And that report will go to the April Council. There was discussion at Council Business Management Committee earlier in the week, because it looks like we have 2 scrutiny Task and Finish reports to go to the April Council, which of course is causing a little bit of a headache in terms of the programming of the council meeting.
I think one of the issues raised with me was the timeframes in which the inquiry recommendations need to sit with a cabinet member before full council.
Well, that's for you to follow up, Jack. Economies and skills, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, our main focus of the last couple of months has been our inquiry, and we've had some really excellent work going on in terms of the inquiry. So we've got additional reasons as well to try and get stay up to date with that aim of presenting a final report on the 5th of April council meeting, so everything's going according to plan so far.
And yours is also an inquiry which will be going to, yes, it is.
Yes, it's
yours is also an inquiry which will be going to council in April, I understand. Yep. Alex?
Chair, there's nothing in the April agenda at the moment in that scrutiny. The chair certainly thought things will work.
Unemployment, sorry, did you say?
Yes, unemployment or tackling something to do around that. I don't know if that's been covered in your scrutiny moment.
I didn't hear the last part of that, sorry.
So it's just 26th of April, there's nothing in your meeting at the moment. Just wondered if you had any thoughts about doing something around unemployment, potentially.
Unemployment, yeah, I mean, that's like one of the main sort of focuses of our inquiry is obviously the purpose of it is to reduce unemployment. So, yeah, we can certainly look at looking at unemployment. That's like an ongoing thing on our committee.
Maybe you need to talk about
Yeah.
Absolutely. Education and children's social care.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, really full work programme for the next couple of meetings. We have got some flexibility in our May meeting, which will possibly hear the inquiry work in more detail. So, yeah, I don't think I need to expand much more on that.
Okay. No other comments. Health and social care.
The inquiry was scheduled to report, is it June or July? Potentially going in the beginning, the next move, if we that's slower than I'd have liked it to have been, but I think it's appropriately viewed the amount of work that we actually need to cover the numbers because we need to engage with. I think in terms of the work programmes, I think with Joint Task, UHB reported to us in terms of their methodology at our 19th of January meeting. We hope to get an initial update and a full report of the first of the review inquiries at the March meeting. I think in terms of the cost for Birmingham by itself, we had a really interesting discussion led by John Williams on adult social care reforms in January, which is going to be impacted in people, certainly from 2025, but part of it in late part of 2023. We're hoping to get immunisation reported to us in February, because I think there are some concerns in terms of the amount of immunisations that are actually taking place at the moment. We've got the Cabinet members reporting to us again in March, which will be really opportune. A full report from Day Opportunities on co-production along in March as well. And the ICB will be coming to us in April to give us an update in terms of where they are in terms of moving forward as an organisation across healthcare provision in Birmingham and Solihull. Thank you.
Okay. No other comment? No. Housing in neighbourhoods, Edith?
Thank you, Chair. The last 3 months, our focus has been on ratification litter and November, December, January meetings. Following the board meeting, we had the presentation from officers from Wigan, and Rochdale. What we were doing to tackle this issue, and we learned a lot from the presentations. And we had draft recommendations following those discussions, which we will be discussing with the cabinet member next week or the week after. Following that, we will be adopting those recommendations formally in one of the following meetings.
Thanks. Jack.
It was just to have a recommendation for the Housing and Neighbourhoods Committee, which is perhaps to do a piece of work around the standard of void council properties and the standard with which the council looks at when leaving a property void.
That's already in the programme. That's one after. Yeah.
Because I spoke to you about that before.
Okay. Maybe you have a discussion between you. Okay, resources are Ahmed is not here, but are there any issues there? No. And then finally, we've got the sustainability and transport.
We can be to the university station last month. Look at the Ray and other things. And now we're having a audit with the AGM on the 8th of February. And nothing we're having a audit.
Okay. Anything on that one? No. Okay. I can then move on to item 10, request for call-in, etc. I have nothing there. Date of next meeting, 17th of February. Now, we're hoping that that will be a meeting that will be dedicated to the domestic abuse agenda issue, which Alex has taken forward on our behalf. So just reminding you, it will be something similar in sense to what we've done today, with a big focus on one particular issue. 13 as authority to chair and officers, normal resolution. Agreed. And welcome back, Deirdre. I hope your meeting was successful.
Well,
I missed a very interesting discussion around the Ukraine agenda. It was exceedingly good. Okay, thank you very much, and apologies for being 5 minutes late in finishing.